anybody who works in the world of digital creativity, Adobe is the bedrock to bring bold ideas to life. Meet the man who brought Adobe's ideas to life, transforming the company into an engine that powers our creative workflows with tools like Photoshop, Premiere, Illustrator, and After Effects, among others. Be it for enterprise teams or for the lone-ranging freelance artist. Shantanu Narayen has been at Adobe for nearly 3 decades, and as its CEO for the last 17 years, he's piloted its transition from the early internet decade to cloud and now generative AI. A self-confessed cricket fan who would trade sleep to follow the Indian cricket team, Narayen moved to the US nearly 4 decades ago and has stood witness to the greatest technological revolutions of our time, not only at Adobe, but also in the Silicon Valley. With Shantanu Narayen at Adobe's world headquarters in California's Bay Area, where better to kick off the 2024 edition of the Young Turks' Voices from the Valley. The 10th edition of Voices from the Valley. I'm Shireen Bhan, and what an honor it is to bring you our first edition here at the Adobe campus with Shantanu Narayen. Shantanu, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us here on Voices from the Valley. It's great to have you back on the program.
Well, congratulations on 10 years, Shireen, and welcome to Adobe. It's great to have you here.
It's great to be here, but let me start by talking to you about what's going on at Adobe. Shantanu, you've delivered, in your own words, an outstanding quarter in Q2, beating all estimates, record revenue coming in. What's the most exciting aspect of FY24 for you at this point in time?
Well, I think the product innovation that we're delivering, Shireen, it always, warms your heart when you look at the amount of innovation that we're delivering. And I think we've talked about this in the past. AI is going to be this incredibly enabling technology that allows us to, target a broader set of customers. And so I guess it's the era of AI.
It is the era of AI. And, you talked about how you believe AI is going to be an enabler. And there's 2 sides of the story that we're seeing play out. One, in your words, the acceleration of technology and the democratization of technology. And the other, what is it going to mean for humanity? But on the enabling front, for a company like Adobe, I remember in your earnings call, I think David Wadhwani said that, FY23 was sort of the starting point and this is going to be the year of production. So explain to me what that means from an Adobe perspective.
Well, if you take a step back first, the reality is that, what computers do really well is they pattern match. And, when you can automate tasks or when you can get a computer to interpret what you're trying to do, and do it on your behalf, then magic happens. And if you look at our different businesses, on the creative side, we always say everybody has a story to tell. And AI will enable you to jumpstart that ideation process, as well as automate the inefficient parts, whether it's video creation or image enhancement. And so, on the creative side, we've also released a brand new application called Express.
Yeah.
And so on creativity, when we talk about creativity for all, we think AI will just enable that to happen because you can now take that idea that's in your head and create it.
And the fear that this is going to mean the end of art, it's going to mean the end of music. How do you respond to that?
I think it's just the opposite. I think it's absolutely just the opposite, because what is going to happen right now is it's going to enable so many more people to enter the creative field. If you can draw well, you can start with a drawing, you can scan that into an Adobe product, and you can make a creation out of it, And so I'm completely convinced that just like every other piece of technology, when Photoshop came out first, people were really questioning whether that would mean the end of photography as we know it. And we know that, the story was just the opposite. Photoshop enabled millions and millions of people to, pursue this craft. And now I think it'll be billions of people. I always say when I grew up in India, it was reading, writing, and arithmetic. But now it's all
cricket.
And cricket, of course. That's a passion. But it's also about digital literacy. And so I think on the creative side, AI is going to be this massive ability for people to say, how can I create something? And even on the fly. This product that we have called Express, it allows you to do it on a mobile device. So on the creative side, I'm completely convinced that it's a massive tailwind. Same thing on the document side. We recently introduced stuff that's been done completely out of India, this new product called AI Assistant for Acrobat. And if you take a step back and think about, there are trillions of PDFs out there in the world.
Right.
If you can have a conversational interface with a PDF, give me the summary, let me ask some questions, compare this PDF with maybe 15 other PDFs that I've done. It just makes that entire engagement with your knowledge management system so much more productive. And so I think AI assistant on that part as well is just going to make the world of information far more accessible through AI assistant for PDF. And then on the powering digital businesses, this is enabling every business like CNBC to engage with their customers digitally and deliver personalized content. Now we can create campaigns, we can create content, we can address the content supply chain. So I'm completely convinced that AI, while I acknowledge it'll be disruptive, at the end of the day, it's going to be a massive enabler and a tailwind.
You know, since you're talking about disruption as well as the power of AI to sort of change the world as we know it today, Shantanu, you know, what is, as far as your suite of services is concerned, and you gave us a glimpse of what you've been able to do so far, and we're just talking about the starting at the initial stages as far as the AI adoption is concerned. I mean, what is the potential of what you intend to, with Adobe, do as far as AI is concerned?
When we think about AI, we have, I think, a very solid strategy about saying how do we think about data, how do we think about models, and how do we think about interfaces. The data, as you know, Adobe has a very differentiated approach. We've said we've trained our models only on data that we have complete license for.
Yeah.
So the Firefly set of images is being, you know, so widely adopted because people recognize that we can tell them exactly how that model was trained. I think you're going to see all these new models. You know, the terminology is this multimodal large language models. And you know, these large language models are going to enable you to do things that previously you could not do. Maybe extend a video for 30 minutes without, you know, having perhaps the necessary, you know, content right up front. And then there's interfaces. And I think it's really in the interface layer where the value is, because you as a user or I as a user, yeah, we may talk about the models or the data, but at the end of the day, it's the applications that we use, the services that we use, you know, that are going to be incredible. And if you take a step back, I actually think AI finally allows us to have personalized medicine for individuals. It allows us to have a personal tutor and, you know, transform education. Similarly, in creativity, it allows you to have, you know, this assistant that's actually, you know, constantly helping you with your creation. So, I think while we're innovating across all of these spectrums, the data, the models, and the interfaces, I think you're going to see AI-first applications emerge that today is just, you know, in people's imagination.
Yeah, well, you know, I want to address the issue that you brought up as far as Firefly was concerned, because I think part of the conversations that we're having around AI today are also conversations that involve trust or the lack of it, or transparency and the lack of it. And I know that you've already clarified that you're not using user content or user data to train the models, and you've put out, in fact, just this morning, a fresh clarification on that. But where do you believe this trust deficit comes from, and how do you believe a company like yours will need to address it?
Well, first, I'm really proud of what our team has done. When you think about the content authenticity initiative, something that we pioneered, over 3,000 companies have now signed up, whether it's a camera manufacturer saying, when we create a camera picture, we will put a provenance or a nutrition label on it. You know, companies like Adobe, where in our tools, when we edit it, we'll allow you to create that digital certificate. And then, you know, people who are the publishers, the New York Times, Meta, everybody is also signed up to say, let's make sure to combat deep fakes that we have the ability to do that. I think, you know, while people understand that AI has all this power, I think it's fair to say there's some heightened sensitivity around what does this mean to me? And so, you know, that I wouldn't call it a trust deficit as much as questions about what that is. And a company like Adobe has a leadership role that we need to play, not just for ourselves with our customers, but for the industry at large. And so I think to the conversation that you were having about our terms of use, I think there were some questions, and legally everybody who looked at that understood that, you know, the content belongs to them. We're not training our models based on that. But I think perhaps in English we could have done a simpler job of clarifying it. So,
which you have today.
Which we have. And so, we've rolled it out. We are creator friendly. I mean, we have this incredible creative professional network called Behance. And there are tens of millions of people on Behance. They come, they provide their content. It serves as an incredible inspiration. The terms of that do not allow us to train it, so we haven't trained it. And so, if we don't represent the views of the creative, who will? And it's something that we take very seriously.
Speaking about the creative community as well as building this trust between what's happening in the world of AI today, can you talk to me about the question about whether there can be a moral code that can be built in, whether companies like yours will build that in the context of, for instance, what you've been able to do with content authentication. What do you believe the road ahead could possibly look like in an AI world?
It's a great question, Shireen. And the way we're trying to think about it is, what are the things that we have as our core hypotheses or assertions? And how can you communicate that very clearly with your customers? Because customers today demand, both transparency in terms of how you deal with it and understanding. I'll give you another example. On the digital marketing side, we've always said that, it's the customer's data and we don't, use the customer's data, and we drew the line in the sand. Now, other companies might decide that they own the data just as much because they're providing that as a service.
Yeah.
So I'm not here saying that there's one business model that satisfies everybody, but I think having those core hypotheses clear for a company and then communicating that clearly, I think that's what's required. I mean, just like on the internet, there are companies that will pay you, charge you for something, but not use your data. Other companies will do ads. And so they're different business models. The question is, are companies being transparent about how they are doing it?
How do you see the regulatory environment at this point in time? I mean, there are concerns that big tech is too big and there need to be guardrails, especially when we talk about AI. Different countries are looking at AI regulation differently. I mean, for a company like yours, how do you navigate what is going on today? Because there is a fair degree of uncertainty around what will be permissible, what will be allowed, and where it will be allowed.
You're right, because of the fact that people appreciate that AI can have this incredibly profound impact on lives. But it potentially could do some harm or have some unintended consequences. And so, whether it's the sovereignty of data or whether, what these models might be used for, there's a lot of discourse that's happening in every country around the world around what this means, whether it's the US, whether it's Europe, whether it's India. And to your point, they're doing a whole bunch of things like AI acts. I think the narrative has perhaps gone a little bit towards one or the other extreme to the conversation we had, which is either people believe this is the panacea to everything, or people believe that it's so evil that no good can come of it. And the truth clearly is somewhere in the middle. And so, I'm a firm believer that this technology is moving so quickly. They're trying to regulate it prematurely, I think will competitively put countries behind. And so whether it's India, whether it's the US, or whether it's Europe, I think countries need to be thoughtful about how they do it, So what should be regulated, or what should governments look at regulating today when we talk about AI? I think the countries should really be looking at understanding, what this AI might be used for, and when things are found where it might violate those, what are the ways in which people can address it? This old story, probably a decade right now ago, where somebody created this bot, and the bot was being trained by conversations that it had with people. And what you train it with impacts how it does it. And so, I think as the story goes, this bot had a lot of foul language because people intentionally spoke, foul language to it to try and train it. And so I think what countries should be doing is saying to a company like Adobe, tell us what you're working on, tell us what your core assertions are, and let's continue to monitor this and engage in a conversation. And so I think, for countries to say these are the core hypotheses makes sense. And I think there's certain things that we can talk about, which is, will these models be open source over time, right? There are potential implications that if they fall in the hands of bad actors. But it's the same as cybersecurity. When you had computers and you had access to computers, a whole bunch of hackers and people who were the criminals in the cybersecurity era emerged. That doesn't mean that computers were inherently bad. And so I think it's the same thing with AI.
It's what you do with them.
It's what you do with them. But I think for the most part, the narrative really needs to talk about. I mean, again, in the context of either India or the US, it now allows so much opportunity for people to advance and for society to advance. That's what I'm excited about. And we will certainly pay significant attention to what ethics are or biases. For example, when we created Firefly, we had this incredible effort in parallel to say, when you are creating a prompt and you see the kind of image that it produces, how do we make sure that no biases turn in, that it's not, in any way maligning certain sections of society? And, the term that's used, as you know, is hallucination. So AI is hallucinating, but I think it was guardrails like that and safety measures that we put in place that other companies are also putting in place, which I think will lead to the responsible actors delivering more value than harm.
Speaking of delivering value and collaboration within the tech ecosystem at this point in time, what are we seeing on that front? I mean, you've been partnering with companies like Nvidia, and I think there is a lot more openness today to want to do things together. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. And I think you're seeing a lot of it. I think it's driven by two areas. One is companies like Adobe say, we have to serve our customers. So if a customer is using Microsoft Azure versus Amazon AWS, they're using chips from AMD or Nvidia, if we don't support that and figure out how we can best serve them, we're not doing our job. So I think being dogmatic about that doesn't make sense to a company like Adobe. But on the more exciting front, when I have conversations with Jensen and we talk about the potential of what this is, you come back inspired and you say, oh my God, look at what's happening in this space. And we push them and challenge them and they push us and challenge us. And I think that's how tech advances.
You talked about Jensen. I mean, this is the shock and awe story of the last several years, what's gone on with Nvidia. I mean, what do you make of the kind of rise that we've seen of Nvidia?
Well, Jensen's a absolute legend in the industry, and having known him for decades and considering him a friend, what I would say is that his ruthless, single-minded, drive to continue to deliver innovation. I mean, he has this vision of what he wanted to do with autonomous cars, and so I think this is not a one-hit wonder for Nvidia. I think it's decades of consistently looking around the corner and executing against it. So I could not be more happy for him.
You said that what's driving Adobe at this point from a big picture point of view is innovation and the fact that you continue to be driven by innovation. What are you most excited about? I mean, of course, all the AI stuff that we spoke of, but from an Adobe perspective, on the innovation front, what are you most excited about and what do you hope to really deliver on over the next decade?
It's always hard to, pick one thing, when you have all this incredible abundance of riches of things at Adobe that they were working on, whether it's in the research lab or in the product units. But again, I think in all three of our businesses, we just have so much opportunity to impact people's life. I mean, we address billions of people use our software. And I want that to be tens of billions of people using our software in order to be able to do whatever is their task at hand, whether it's creation, whether it's documents, whether it's productivity, whether it's marketing. And so, again, those are the fields that we're passionate about.
You've been here 25 years, you've been leading the company for close to 2 decades now. How different do you believe Adobe is likely to be in an AI era? I mean, what do you think? The DNA, of course, will remain intact, driven by innovation, but how do you see the company itself changing as we move deeper and deeper into an AI world?
I think for all of us, and we touched on a couple of these things, I mean, the number of constituencies that you have to work with and address, with the rise in social media, with governments, I think that's what's really changed the role. And we're clearly a company that's focused on growth and driving growth. And as you come to these numbers that Adobe now delivers, we're on people's radar. And so understanding that. And so I think its impact is the word that really excites me.
Do you like being on people's radars?
I like being on customers' radars. I like being on customers' radars, when you're sitting on a plane and the person next to you says...
Not so much on the analyst radar where every decimal point is...
That takes care of itself.
Yeah.
Having had the privilege of working as long as I have at Adobe, I think, Adobe was always founded to say, focus on the long run and focus on delivering technology platforms. But I love being on people's radar when they come and tell you, Adobe changed my life. And those are the conversations that motivate you. But you recognize that there are other constituencies that you have to deal with. I think this dealing with multiple constituencies for the generation of leaders who are now coming, that's the area that they have to focus on the most, because previously maybe you focused on product. Now, as I said, we live in a global world. You have to understand things about what's happening with regulation. So I think that's really what's changed. And the larger you get, I think people perhaps view everything that you do with, what are perhaps the motivations. So
suspicion.
I give people the benefit of the doubt. They want to understand your motivations. And so I think making sure that at the company, your moral compass continues to be really solid and you're focused on, the North Star of what you want to deliver. I think that's what drives me.
Yeah,
What's amazing, I will say, is as the company has grown, the gratification that you get from more and more and more innovation is amazing. There isn't a day that goes by where I can't go and say, hey, I want to meet with 6 people, tell me what you're working on. And it's new stuff. When the company was small, you had a pretty good feel of what was going on. Now the company has become so large, you're constantly amazed.
Oh, and you preempted my question, because that's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about. How do you retain that culture of innovation, that culture of creativity, and agility and nimbleness as the organization grows, as the organization has become much more global? How do you retain that? What drives the culture?
Great leaders. The fact that we've been able to hire people. You look at Abhigyan Modi, who runs our India. I think he's been at the company over 20 years. He represents, sort of that next generation of leaders that you look at and say, oh my God. And he has followers, and and then he pays it forward, right? And so I think it's all about your employee base. And I always say, as long as you're really clear about what your mission is as a company and the values, you will attract the kind of people who want to be at the company. And so, as long as we are clear about, the values, you attract the right kind of people. It's the same with investors, right? A lot of people say you get the investors you deserve. And so I think what's really been amazing for us is seeing people who've been here for 5, 10, 15, 20 years continue to thrive and grow. The other thing I would say is the number of people who come back, Shireen, to the company. The grass is not always greener. And sometimes, they leave, there's a new startup, and they're like, oh my God, I want to go try it out. And we're like, go. As long as you leave on good terms. Yeah, they're boomerangs, and, we have so many boomerangs. And I think it just says we're doing something right. The fact that, they always feel like Adobe was the place where they did their best work. That's what makes this place a really special place.
Yeah, but that's interesting, because a lot of people usually don't encourage people to come back once they actually quit the company. But it's interesting to hear you say that you're quite...
I think it all depends on how they leave.
Yeah.
I think it all depends on how they leave. And, it's a free society. So, you keep people here because they want to be here, not because, you force them to be here.
You were talking about the challenges that the leaders of today will have to face, which were perhaps different from the time that you took on your job at Adobe. And more so the regulation aspect and the cross-border aspect of it, and the uncertainty on account of both those. How do you deal with it? For instance, let's talk about what happened with Figma and, saying, look, your monopolies are being created, you're too big, and an acquisition cannot go through, you pay $1 billion in termination. How do you sort of deal with perhaps new challenges that are now on your dashboard, on your radar?
Well, again, I think the culture at Adobe is we can have open conversations. Let's talk about Figma. It was a great adjacency. We told the world that this was a great adjacency, and that's why we were excited. I think what Figma had done in the areas of web and product design were amazing. It wasn't categories that Adobe was going to play in. At some point, both Figma and Adobe realized that the regulatory environment was perhaps not going to allow us to get that done. Not because we were violating any rules, but because people were interpreting the rules differently. And so, I think you want more at-bats, Shireen. At a company like Adobe, you want more at-bats. Not all of them are going to succeed. And so, as long as you take that approach, and
But do you believe that this is going to become much more challenging now? Competition rules, I
do think it will be viewed at with more scrutiny. That there's a reality of that, and there's a reality of that not just in the US, but also the reality of that all across the world. And so you're right. We started Adobe, and the founders started Adobe, and as we've grown it, it's all about how do you build a company that has more impact. The more impact you have, the more you're probably going to be scrutinized. So it comes with the territory, and I do think there will be more scrutiny.
Well, speaking of scrutiny, the latest challenge that you're up against is the US government looking at whether, again, there is a violation of policy and whether there are sort of fees that are being collected without consent or, explicit consent and so on and so forth. How do you deal with something like that?
Well, you first go back to the principles and the facts, and the reality is that it was the government's case is misguided, and so we will fight it and we'll refute it in court. I think if you take a step back and you think about what Adobe has pioneered, the subscription economy and the digital economy is everywhere. I think when I try and read your content, it's probably going to be available through a paywall as a subscription. We have open and flexible policies where some people can pay for it up front and get a discount, and others pay for it on a month-to-month. So having flexibility makes sense. But, it's something that we will address, but we certainly believe that we have been flexible. We offer customer choice, and we're completely transparent about this. When you subscribe to the plan, it says annual bill monthly. And it's an annual plan. And so, but at the end of the day, for us, what really motivates us is the fact that we're impacting and innovating. And I think if people didn't feel like we were innovating, they wouldn't be subscribing to our services. And that's what we have to keep focusing on.
Well, speaking of focus, let's talk about India and Adobe in India. Of course, I know that you've been visiting the Adobe campus in India quite regularly, and it is your largest base outside of the US.
It is.
How significant a role will India play as part of the AI ecosystem, as part of the AI economy? Not just for Adobe, but in general.
As I think about the journey that we've been in India, right? As you know, and you've met with both Naresh and Abhigyan, we started that with this real vision of there's great skills there, there's great talent there like there is everywhere else in the world. So let's go hire the best and let's have them work on really cool stuff. I think the conventional wisdom at that point was people outsource stuff that nobody else wanted to work on, and we said we're going to be different. I think that phase just continues to grow, and it's amazing, as I said, to see the growth of individuals who've stayed with us and now run global roles. It's a matter of great pride. I think the more exciting thing right now is when you work with a company like Tata or Reliance or Indigo or Maruti, the aspirations that the Indian companies have to operate on a global scale, India as a market wasn't a huge market for Adobe. And I think that's where the evolution is now, that, again, you look at the economy is, doing incredibly well, and everybody is really talking about, how that's doing. And so I think the new focus right now in India is all about, how do we grow that as a business for us as well, because all those companies are now having global aspirations of everything that we do. You go talk to Tata and you look at the planes and what they're doing with Air India, and it's not just about the Indian market anymore. And so, that's a really new, exciting thing. We had a recent event in Mumbai, and just to see and hear from the customers, how they're thinking about the global opportunity, a matter of great pride.
Global opportunity, yes, but what about the AI opportunity? Where are Indian clients today in terms of AI adoption? What's the Adobe Research telling you?
Well, I think if India has always pioneered something, it's both an embracing of new technology, but with the jugaad, associated with, what is the cost associated with that. So I think there's a scrutiny on both, what can this really do and how does it mean? And, perhaps there are industries there, like the traditional IT industry, that will have to now think about, what does that mean, for all those companies that got pioneered, 20, 30 years ago. So I think that's what I'm hearing a lot more about. Everybody understands AI. They all, the conversation that you can have with an executive there on large language models and what are the implications and data just tells me it's front and center for them because they want to, grow their customer base and do it cheaper. And that's what AI is going to be used for.
So how significant will India be to Adobe's plan, especially as you build out your AI suite of services?
It's massively important. I mean, as I mentioned, the Acrobat AI assistant, all of the work that's done there. We did text to vector and everything that's being done for Illustrator or InDesign. All of that work is happening there. On the Experience Cloud, we just released AI Assistant for the Experience platform. Work's being done there. And so, we don't tend to think of it as, oh my God, that's the India group. Or, we tend to think of it as, we have this incredible global talent base. And they could be wherever they want. Sometimes we're not as sympathetic to the fact that it may be 12 and a half or 13 and a half hours behind. And every time I go to India, I realize, oh my God, we're expecting people to have meetings, when it's 2:30 in the morning and 3:30 in the morning. And I think the shoe is sometimes on the other foot when I go there and I organize meetings at, noon or 1, and people in the US are like, wait a minute, that's midnight my time. And I'm like,
But hiring more in India?
We're hiring everywhere. I mean, I think we've been hiring. College graduations and interns, that's a big part. I think we just welcomed something like 1,800 interns and, college grads. And again, I know when you talk in India, everybody talks about these massive numbers. For us, I mean, when you think about it as a percentage of the Adobe population, it's massive. And it'll continue to, grow. But we're growing, we can't find enough great talent.
Well, speaking about India, let's talk about the love for cricket, the passion for cricket, which you've now, along with a whole bunch of your other tech friends, brought to the US. I mean, you were in New York for the big match between India and Pakistan. I mean, what does it feel like to have actually managed to bring cricket to the US?
Well, first, I mean, I'm fortunate enough. I've been to many tennis finals, the US Open final. I've been to Wimbledon. I've certainly seen a lot of Super Bowls. The Warriors here in the Bay Area have won the NBA finals. But the excitement that I had, and I went with my son to watch a World Cup cricket in New York. And, every Indian CEO that I knew was either going to be watching it live or watching it in person.
In person, either owning a team or at least supporting a friend's team.
And so it's a passion, and I don't know that we have enough of a farm system here, Shireen. I mean, I think if you look at what happened with soccer or football here in this country, Major League Soccer, what happened was you had a great farm system. So you had passionate fans, like we have passionate fans in cricket. But the question is, how do you encourage that farm system? And so, whether it's Satya or me, we love cricket and we'll continue to champion and passionate it. We're coming up with our second season of Major League, cricket here. And, I'm part of the San Francisco Unicorn team. And so it's fun.
So the Hyderabad Mafia is not just taking over tech, it's bringing cricket to the US as well.
I think we'd like to say we're paying it forward, I mean, rather than, in this case, the Mafia, this is all about a passion, and cricket's a global sport. And actually the funny thing about sport just brings together people like no other activity. And, just the amount of excitement but now we have to go win it all, right? I mean, we've just got to the, Super 8s. And unfortunately, the India-Australia match, I have a board meeting on that day. So it's going to be...
Big conflict.
No, the board meeting is going to take priority. But, I'm going to perhaps sneak a look now and then at what's happening.
I would imagine. But let me end by asking you, Shantanu, we're talking about building companies that last, and building companies that last in an era where technology is changing virtually every second, every minute. I mean, what is it that you would say to a startup founder? What is it that you would say to a CEO today who's looking at building to last?
I think, you've got to pursue your dreams. And you know, the first thing is you've got to pursue your dreams. And I've always believed that if they can focus on delivering value to customers, everything else takes care of itself. You know, between usage and revenue, usage is the better early predictor for you know, technology-based companies. And so, you know, get people to love the products that you build, get them to, and the other thing I always tell people is, are you going to be a customer of that yourself? You know, when people come and tell me, I have this idea that somebody else told me and I did a survey and I think there's that opportunity, frankly, that holds less water with me than when people say, I have this problem and I want to build a technology or a product to solve a problem and I'm going to use it. And at least my pattern recognition, the most successful companies are when people say, I'm building this product for myself because I understand the pain point and I'm going to go address it.
What is the next pain point that you have that you hope to address via Adobe?
Well, I think AI and creativity, I mean, we talk about it. Why is it that a K through 12 student still, you know, when they write a paper, you know, they're writing it in text. They're not having videos, they're not including 3D objects, they're not pointing to links about, you know, other sources of information that they want. And, you know, I think access to information, at Adobe we really believe that access to information is not power. Access to information is the way that you democratize, you know, how a company can do better things. And so I think that's the part. We're just scratching the surface with AI. I mean, technology
so
is
AI-driven video, the next big inflection point?
It is one of them. Technology is still too hard to use. And if you can believe that technology is still too hard to use, and with the proliferation of content that's out there, how do you make that content more consumable? How do you make that content more, you know, monetizable? How do you make that content more measurable? And so I think content, when we think about two things, we think about content, the entire world of content, and we think about data, which is, you know, what are the users and how are users going to use it? And I think if you marry content and data, magic's going to happen.
Well, we look forward to that magic. And Shantanu, it's always a pleasure. Thanks so much for speaking to us here on Voices of the Valley. And we look forward to seeing you back in India. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, and thanks for being at Adobe.